Welcome back to Stories Across Borders, where we discuss stories told across a variety of different mediums. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of those stories. Anything like game mechanics, acting, animation, all of that, they are off limits unless they directly relate to the way a narrative is being presented. I am Daniel Radford, author, dragon fanatic, and your host, and once more I am joined by John Kernan.
Like dragons.
Who doesn't? Honestly, who doesn't?
Losers.
Jumping back into our current theme, which is magic and not dragons, uh, this time around we'll be discussing a series of books that, if you grew up in the same generation we did, you are almost certainly familiar with Christopher Paolini's Inheritance cycle. If that doesn't ring any bells to you, it's the Dragon Rider books that start off with Eragon and end with the eponymous Inheritance.
Yep. A lot of people, if they weren't big fans or didn't read like specifically through all the books, forget that's what the actual series is called.
Yeah, I feel like anyone who hasn't actually like paid attention to the books and there's only books has probably only really remembered the first book's title.
Yeah, that's when you just go like it's Aragon, and if they're like, "What's that?" You go, "It's the one about Aragon," and
It's
and
that blue book with the blue dragon on it. Oh,
my favorite is the green one with the green dragon, because green.
it's also just the best written of the four of them, which
Yeah, I
which
mean,
does make sense as it's the last of them, and he started writing the first when he was like what, 17?
literally growing up alongside his audience.
Yeah. In case it's not obvious, I have very fond memories of those books, and I have gone back to them a few times over the years, and honestly, they do still mostly hold up. Um,
Yeah,
they've been dunked on a little bit over the years since they were released, because sometimes justifiably, I suppose, but there's a lot of good there. Um,
absolutely. I think honestly, especially for like a long form series, he does, especially for his young age, like a shockingly good job having it be or having like a consistent point of view story because like a lot of stories that go on that long to keep any kind of focus uh have to zoom out from a singular character a lot more than Inheritance does from Aragon himself.
yeah,
But,
I mean,
without falling apart, it very firmly stays his story, although we do get some time here and there to follow other people directly for a little while.
yeah, starting in Eldest, the second book, we start cutting to his cousin fairly often, and I think
And, we start cutting to Naswada for
yeah,
a little
I was
while
like, I
too.
don't know if that's in Eldest or if it's in Brisinga, but in one of them we start getting some from her as well.
That's one of the reasons I love Eldest so much, that's I I find Roran to be such an interesting character.
He is one of, if not my favorite character in the entire series, because he's just a guy.
Yeah. It's the story of how a guy who's just a guy becomes a hero purely because he's like, "My family. I can't let them get my family." Except, every other person who does that is the protagonist, and he's not.
Yeah, he's definitely very different to his cousin, who is the eponymous Aragon, the actual protagonist, in that Aragon is kind of thrust into his journey, whilst Roran actively chooses to take that journey himself, and not just on his own. He spends the better part of the second book trying to make his entire village mobilize.
Yeah, he he very forcefully and unwittingly has to like take the place of a leader purely by virtue of being like, guys, you're all gonna die. It's like
Yeah,
if you're all gonna behave like stubborn pack mules, then I'm gonna treat you like stubborn pack mules and smack you until you get walking.
pretty much he finds himself in this position of leader, and he's completely unaware of how well he takes to it.
Yeah.
Because as he is often pointed out throughout the story, at least as far as I remember, it has been a while since I've read it. He is an ordinary man who, he's not even educated or anything. He's just a farmer's son who not only finds himself effectively the de facto leader of this village when he starts trying to get them to mobilize, but also finds himself operating in a war in this arena that is full of dragons and elves and spellcasters. And he's a dude
And
with a hammer.
creepy, horrible, awful creatures
Bug bird things, yeah.
specifically manipulated by magic and evolution to be apex human predators.
And yeah, and that's it. Those things, the Razak, are his default enemies. Like
Yeah, the thing that is way superhuman beyond him and exists solely to kill us
the
humans.
the things that can give his Dragon Rider spell slinger cousin a run for his money and are superior to him early on, and he's got to
Yeah,
deal with them as a guy.
literally if the creatures that go bump in the night not only existed but were just a natural thing that was kind of meant to eat us. That's what they are. Like their so thing that goes bump in the night, they not only are like perfectly built to kill us, but like literally have evolved traits that bring out primal, irresistible, paralyzing fear in humans. I
And
didn't mean to say it weird like that, but my brain couldn't decide whether to say humanity or humans, so I said humans.
we all get what you meant. But yeah, not like on top of that, these are creatures that are specifically like biologically. I was gonna say biologically designed, but that's inaccurate. They have specifically evolved to be resistant, if not outright counter, all of the things that the ordinary humans can do to level the playing field,
And magic.
which is one of those things in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only are they highly resistant to magic, but their crazy psychotic god king has also put a bunch of protections on him because they are his personal little assassin pets.
I think it says a lot I suppose that in a lot of ways in this very fantastical magic infused world, just being an ordinary person doing his best and coping and managing all of that shit uh makes Roran so compelling just by default.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
there's something to be said in a fantasy story about the ordinary guy who's gotta just do what like make do with the skills he has.
When the extraordinary is ordinary, the ordinary becomes extraordinary.
Yeah, very succinctly put. I like it. Yeah, I think he is definitely a very compelling character, and for similar reasons as Naswada is very compelling because she has no like magic or pet dragon, or I mean calling it a pet dragon is disingenuous to the way the world works, but you know what I mean. You
Yeah,
know,
she doesn't have a dragon. She just has a scary little dragon girl.
we'll get to Elfa like Elva? Elva, I think.
Elva.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get to her later. um but yeah,
Very relevant to magic, that's for sure.
she doesn't even have the physical strength that Roran does. She operates in this world by wielding just her own stubbornness.
She's got nothing but her wits, her charisma, and her foresight.
Yeah, she leverages political power and clout and determination in the same way that other characters, leverage actual
Oh yeah.
power.
And one of the traits I enjoy is that like unironically, she starts doing that from the very beginning because I don't even remember if they do more than hint at it or if they ever even like overtly mention it later on after it's happened or if like Aragon realizes it, but like the very first time she comes on screen, she is like low-key being seductive with Aragon, like already ready to just make a powerful connection, and she hasn't even become the leader yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure about because
The reason I say that is because she never acts like even remotely flirtatious with him, like
yeah, that's what I'm
for
trying.
the rest of the
I'm just double
story.
doing. I was doing a double check in my head to make sure I wasn't confusing her with Triana when you said that, because Triana's a little bit
Well,
more.
Triana is just like
Yeah,
outright like, hey, if I seduce a dragon man.
yeah. With
But no,
Nasuara, it's
with
less. It's
Nasuara,
not even.
it just felt more like, huh, it could be very convenient if I married Dragon Man. A lot I could do with that. But that doesn't last long. There's like a few hints of that here and there.
No, she's no, she's definitely not a romantic interest character. There is one of those, but it becomes very apparent very quickly, especially when we see things from her perspective occasionally, that she really does not see the world in that way at all. She a little bit later on down the line with someone else, but she's pretty much sees the world only in the terms of what needs doing.
Yeah, no. And it's funny because we literally have times through the story where she's going through these horrible, awful things to get through it, and like people around her who are loyal to her and already respect her are just like, oh, you deserve so much better than this. You shouldn't be putting up with like X or Y or blah blah blah. And she's like, I'll put up with I would put up with worse than this to win.
I will
You, you
inflict
think I'm mad?
I will inflict extreme levels of blood loss on myself just to retain control over these tribes.
Not just the tribes either. I'm not even just talking about the trial of knives. Like in general, I mean,
I
she basically says like I would put up with whatever I had to if I have to if I have to give up my dignity or my body in either sense of doing that. Like I'm gonna make this work. We're gonna win, and
yeah,
I'm gonna make it happen as our leader.
that's I bring up the Trial of Knives just because it's the like
It's
epitome of that.
that is both her lowest point and her like greatest triumph.
Well, I can think of a lower point, but
Um,
uh,
But hey,
hard to beat being held captive by the enemy, as far
you
as
know who else is
Lobos.
cool and also relates to magic? Murtagh.
But yeah, very late. Well, yeah, no, I think it's fair to say he's a fairly layered character. He's our sort of brooding anti-hero turned villain turned anti-hero.
I don't know. At first, I don't even necessarily call him an anti-hero. He's like
He's just kind of there.
he's pretty bright and optimistic the first time he shows up.
uh, he's very evasive.
Well, about his own past and everything and all that, sure, but I mean like
He still has the beginnings of the edgy boy vibes, I think.
yeah, but it's like he at first gives me more of a vibe of somebody who's like seen some shit but is still trying to make the best of the world because he's the one who like there are times early on he helps push Aragon forward, keep him focused, and they start bonding pretty strongly pretty quickly, which well, you know. Spoiler alert, if nobody's figured out yet that we might be spoiling the thing we're talking about.
It's only
Um
been, over a decade since the last book came out.
it's perfectly fitting that they form such an almost brotherly bond so fast.
Yeah, weird that almost like they are, half siblings.
Almost as if they were brothers. Yeah, I like Murtagh. Although, of course, my my favorite character unfortunately doesn't get to actually be in the story for that long. You
Uh,
can probably guess who that is.
I'm gonna assume Angela, but
Okay, okay, my favorite not technically a side character.
oh, oh, Brom,
Yeah! I love Braum.
grumpy old
I
mentor character.
I love grumpy old mentor characters.
I mean, he's
They're
hard not to. They're hard not to
they're
like.
always so fun, and I love Braum because I think very few, even a lot of the best mentor characters, I think don't end up getting like who they were underneath expanded on after their deaths as much as he
It's
is.
because
But
most
like,
of the time they serve as purely a plot device, and I mean that's not
yeah.
untrue with Brom. It's just that he's one guy being like three different plot devices at once.
Well, but I also love that like it's one thing I gotta give Paolini credit for. None of none of Brahms' like later revealed significance feels arbitrary or contrived. It actually kind of just feels like those would be the things that naturally lead into who he already is when Aragon meets him.
Oh yeah,
He's
absolutely.
and it all like fits perfectly, and I love it. It's plus, I mean, to be fair, even a lot of the deepest changes of him are foreshadowed pretty pretty early on. Like, I love the thing of just like, oh yeah, these dragon names. There was this and this and this, and oh, for this very blue, one of the most beautiful dragons, she was named Saphira. Not not that I mean, yeah, that was a cool name. I bet Saphira was a
Yeah.
pretty cool dragon when she was still alive.
Not that we ever met, huh?
And
Worth
it's a
noting,
lot.
he is a lot more subtle about it than we just were.
Yeah, obviously. But like I love that there's not only all that going on, but we see that despite having been a human and not even one of the most powerful dragon riders, because, despite the fact that Braum got old, he never got to that point of looking like a half elf, half human
I
that
think that
Aragon
was
did.
kind of a special thing to Aragon, though, that happened during that ritual. I don't think most of
Well,
them got transformed to that extent.
it's tough to say because no, that's true. He probably got transformed a little more than most people, but also they made it clear that that's like that what that is a natural thing that happens to you after spending years and years and years
Yeah.
as a dragon rider. And, and there's really no sign of that with Braum. Like they don't talk about Braum having elfin features really at all. In fact, they mention it a little bit with some other dragon riders to a point, but like not Braum. He is distinctly still completely human in appearance. In fact, I would say he appears specifically unelfin because man,
Just by
that dude
bearing.
that dude's got his square jaw, his like wiry old man strength, and his big beard.
He's a very grounded character. He's like, what if you took Gandalf and stripped away the whimsy and made him a little bit of a bastard?
No, no, you don't have to say that second part. Gandalf was a little bit of a bastard.
Different kind of bastard, though.
Fair. But yeah, no, I brought that up because despite not having that kind of as far as we know, magical power, even when he was a dragon rider, his skill with magic would rival a lot of the best elves, and we see that through these little tricks here and there and through like how subtle and determined he was about his ring. That's actually one of my favorite moments in the story when Aragon taps into Brahm's ring and is like, "Oh, holy shit! How much magic is in here?" He
Because he
what?
spent years just all that time in exile just storing it. And
Yeah,
it
every single bit of spare energy he had while having the amount of strength a regular human has, because he hasn't been a dragon rider for a long time, mind you, just
yeah.
getting squirreled away into that ring.
And I don't think in like up even up till his death, I don't think he ever taps it.
No,
But that ring is just a really good example of something that I really like about him compared to a lot of other of the sort of default mentor characters in these sorts of stories is that even after his, mandatory death, he continues giving to the story.
yeah, oh yeah. Also, like, man, what a send off. Diamond coffin.
Yeah, hard to top that.
And you know what? You know what I love about that too is I think even that you could say gets recontextualized more as time goes on because like after it happens at first you're like, oh, that's hype, that's cool, makes sense, dragons can sometimes do impossible things with their primal, unlike humans, connection to magic through feelings and instincts, and that's what Saphira did. But at the same time, to me, it feels like there's more than that because I also always get the feeling that there's like almost a bit of a collective unconscious to a point for Dragonkind, and it feels to me more like she tapped into that, and that wasn't just a personal gesture from a dragon with a connection to her, but almost like a send off to a man who did a lot and was a lot to Dragonkind.
Yeah, I don't know if it runs as deep as that, but I'm sure. But I feel like there had to have been an element of just respect on that level because she knew.
That's true. Yeah,
Uh,
she was sworn to secrecy, but she knew.
and it's impressive she kept the secret, given that she has a literal telepathic link to her rider. Uh, the ancient language is cool like that, and we'll probably get into that in a second too. Because so something to be clear about, because we are gushing a lot, and I do want to pull us a little bit back to the focus quotation marks. Is
Would be magic.
It would be magic, but to get to that point, I feel like it's worth acknowledging that the Inheritance Cycle, especially the earlier books, is a derivative work. Uh, it has taken heavy inspiration from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Perns, and even even if you're looking for it, the original Star Wars movies, and those inspirations are quite blatant. It's a very clear-cut example of the classic hero's journey, and it includes a lot of standard fantasy tropes, just even beyond the inspiration it takes from those series. But I think it would be disingenuous to say that despite that the heavy inspiration from all that, that there's no originality at all. Because one of the cool things that it does is it takes all these different inspirations and things and weaves them into something coherent on its own. And I think one of the best examples of that is how all those elements come together to create a very interesting and multi-layered hard magic system.
Yeah, absolutely. The magic system in Aragon Inheritance is very interesting, and so is the ancient language itself. Something I like to think Tolkien would have been like low key proud of if he'd gotten to see.
I would say so. It definitely wasn't as well developed as Tolkien's languages, but
No,
Tolkien,
but
when he
I
wrote his
mean that
books,
man was
was a
that man was
literal
a
language professor.
career linguist. So
And when Paolini started developing his ancient language, he was a 17-year-old who, hadn't even finished high school or anything.
17-year-old farm boy. Even Aragon starts out as a self-insert, low key.
Was he a farm boy? His parents are publishers.
Yeah, but didn't at the beginning. Well, no, not a farm boy. I shouldn't say. But if I remember right, he lived a pretty rural life early on, didn't he? I mean,
I'm
I
not.
feel like he mentions that at the beginning of Aragon.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not super knowledgeable about his own, like his history or anything. I'm not that knowledgeable about a lot of authors beyond what they've written. I could
Maybe I'm
believe
not
it.
remembering right. I read and heard a couple
I know
interviews.
I do know that he does take inspiration from people he knows for like some of his characters and stuff like that. I vaguely remember
Oh
reading
yeah,
somewhere that Angela was based on
Angela
his
is his
sister.
sister. Yeah.
But yeah, the magic system. So brief overview of it. The sort of first primary rule, which is one of my favorite things about this magic system, is it has a hard limit to what it is capable of doing. You cannot achieve something with magic that you lack the physical energy to achieve with your own two hands. Uh, which means you can't lift a mountain, you can't bring back the dead, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And the only reason that it's not nearly impossible to do something like, for instance, make a fireball is because most of the energy you would have to use to, say, make a fireball would be causing the
Yeah, it's
actual
just
reaction that
starting the
ignites it.
ignition. Exactly.
Whereas flinging it, if you have the magical skill, very easy because fire, not exactly heavy.
Exactly. It it's that one hard rule automatically creates a lot of nuance with how the spellcasters in the story weave their magic, because one of the interesting things about it is that it's actually theoretically super easy to kill someone with magic. Like, not even talking fireballs and stuff like that. There is even specifically, I think it's 12 just magic words that specifically I don't remember what they're referred to, but they're like the instant death uh, spells, basically, because they do things like sever the right arteries or the right nerves or just fry a brain. Real subtle, simple things that do not take a lot of energy to do. Which means any spellcaster in the series worth their salt is warded up to the teeth against those specific effects.
Yeah, and which, in a way, is something I love too. Like that that almost like perfectly translates what's a very common RPG mechanic that was originally inspired by books back into books in a much more direct way, and that's your magical ability scaling with your intelligence. Because you unironically need to be smart to use magic well in this series, not because your brain power literally makes your magic stronger, but because like only a small percentage of your magical skill is going to be how powerful you are or how many spells you can use. The rest of it is all about being clever. The more clever you are, the more dangerous you are as a magician.
Yes, absolutely. Because, if you just try one of those kill words on someone, chances are they're going to be warded, and that's going
Yeah.
to bounce back, and then you'll die instead. And even the
Yeah,
wards
because
themselves,
that's one of the funny things they talk about too is wards. It is a lot harder to defend against a reflected spell than a regular one too.
yeah,
So like
because
that
it's
much more
your own
dangerous.
stuff being thrown back at you, yeah. And even the wards themselves play into this rule because they also drain your energy.
Yeah,
Well,
which
when they defend you.
is one of the scary things about any like genuinely really powerful like wizards or mages, whatever you want to call them, who have the actual like power to back up their skill is every once in a while, a really powerful mage might just say fuck it and brute force you if they're not sure they can outsmart you, because they could just do something like beat down your wards until the wards deactivate or kill you, because that's something a wizard has to be, or whatever, a magician has to be careful about too, is for instance, most really most skilled smart wage mages will have wards that are set to automatically deactivate beyond a certain point
Yeah,
because otherwise
they'll just keep
they
draining
could
their
just
energy, even if
they,
they're
they could just
unconscious.
literally kill you.
That's why it's such a big deal. When in the final fight, when they're losing against the king, what's his name, Galbatorix?
Yep.
Yes. Aragorn just goes fuck it and throws a spell at him that's just laced with like every single one of the instant death words,
Just in case you
just
got
in
that
case this
desperate.
guy has been so cocky that he's, you know, not remembered to put up one of those defenses or something. It doesn't
Uh,
work, but
That's how overwhelming his power is.
it does. Yeah, but because of how much that rule has been drilled into us throughout the series up till that point, you know how big a deal it is that he's willing to take that risk at that moment.
Thinking about magical power and overwhelming strength from mages made me start thinking about Glader, and now I'm sad.
I mean, not technically dead.
No,
Not.
actually, technically very dead. Not technically gone,
Yeah, that's a better way
definitely
of putting
dead.
it.
Cause that orb thing is 100% a form of death for dragons.
Yeah, I mean they still have their consciousness in there in their little Eldenari things, but
Yeah, but like, what's the point of living when your rider's gone?
Well, yeah, when your ride is gone and when you have lost all sense, you have no sight, touch, smell. It's a like
That's one thing they show very well that I think is I love that Glader kind of pops up and starts being useful later, but man, he first goes into that orb, he is doing nothing but screaming in complete and utter sadness and loss into the void. Like, can't even communicate with him, can't even talk to him. He is not there. He's too busy having a breakdown that the other half of his soul has gone into the void and he can't go with it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Because, like, when a dragon and a rider are together long enough, they essentially
yeah,
do
it's
become
it's
two halves of the same
you're
soul.
not losing your partner, you're losing a part of yourself, which is
Yeah,
just it's so much deeper. Because I mean that's which is just another element of the magic system in a lot of ways, because there is a psychic element to magic in this series.
true.
And like
Yeah, I
the
mean,
most like
in fact, that's one of the things I love is that I love that the more psychic part of it actually unironically universal. Anybody can can technically learn how to do the brain shit even if they couldn't cast a hint of magic.
I don't know if that's tr I don't remember. I'm not entirely sure if it's anyone can do the offensive side of it, but anyone can definitely learn to defend against it.
Well, I think you need a certain amount of magical aptitude to actively probe someone else's brain from
Yeah,
the
but to
outside.
defend against it, it's not about magic, it's about discipline.
Well, even then, I would say you could still actually be offensive, but like
Make the
someone else would
connection,
have to
maybe. Yeah,
breach that. Yeah.
that's possible. Yeah, I mean, I like that because it no, it gives ordinary people a means of defending against mental attacks for one thing.
Yeah.
But also I like how like it's understated at some points. I think certainly from an like in universe perspective. But to the people who know, the ability to break a mind is huge. It's the most important part of a battle between wizards, because then you can start undoing people's wards and things because you have access to the information.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as we see later, for someone who's skilled enough at it, especially who's got time, there's a lot more you can do with breaking someone's mind than that too. Uh, that's one of the things they communicate to us early on. That's what makes Galbatorix so terrifying, both as a warrior and as a psychotic despot. Is he's really, really good at breaking minds, and he has his own castle and dungeon in which to do it.
Yeah. Uh, Here, the ability to do that, you can manipulate someone so easily, you can get so much information, and you make them just vulnerable to your offenses. It's one of the things that makes Dragon Riders so powerful in universe is that they have effectively an extra layer of offense or defense against that sort of thing because it's
You have
two
two different
minds.
minds to contend with, and not only two minds, but one of them is likely that is not only partially inhuman, but also ancient beyond its own years. Because that's one of the things they communicate is that like even young dragons have a kind of like ancient lived vibe to them in the cases of the young ones beyond what they should actually physically be capable of.
Because they absorb things
Their
whilst they're in their egg
souls,
still.
yeah, their souls and minds themselves are kind of ancient and primal even when they're still young,
Uh,
which makes it that much harder for a human to contend with because that's kind of beyond us.
exactly, and it's that's just another thing that makes Galbatorix so absolutely terrifying as an enemy is that he has a whole effectively a whole legion of those brains that he has broken and is now using
So
on his
yeah,
side.
not only do they have that timelessness and ancientness beyond humans with them, but they've also gone mad. So they have the incomprehensibility of true and genuine madness.
Yeah,
He's
s-
fucked up.
and something that ties back into that from another angle, is we touched on the ancient language earlier, which is the sort of it's the language primarily spoken by the elves in the story. It is the magic language of sorts, and magic is tied very strongly to that language.
That reminds me, I forgot. I almost I get the vibe that there might be a little bit of Chronicles of Narnia there too, because when I think about like the base line of what the ancient language is, you know what it reminds me of more than hearing people say words to cast spells and things like Lord of the Rings? It
Intent?
reminds me of it reminds me of the scene in The Magician's Nephew where we get to see Mr. Lion Jesus literally sing the world into being.
Oh, you're right. That might explain why so much of the ancient language's magic is done through song.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, like because that could that's right there in the perfect framing to be another one of young Paolini's influences, and like it, it's very clear we funny enough don't see that much of intentional magic in Chronicles of Narnia, so that it's not 100% relevant. We don't see a lot of intentional magic there. Most of the magic in Narnia is
Just
just a
it's just
part of the
there,
world.
yeah.
But that is one of the examples we do see of someone who is to a point an outside source and has magical power using it, and he does it purely through words. Well, not all words. It's song, but some of it is words, and it's all things, and it feels like it could be a relevant bit of inspiration in that very clearly power through sound and words and intent is a natural like primal force instilled into the world since its inception,
Uh,
which is I find to be a funny thing because obviously the ancient language can't have always existed. At some point, power in that world must have been wordless because there weren't always creatures that spoke words.
I mean, yeah, the dragons, for example, their magic comes from a more primal place where it's all about feeling. So it is interesting to consider like where that transition happened.
It, you know what? I get the feeling. I want to say that I think the reason the ancient language is so powerful, I don't remember if he ever tells us this, I think must be because I think the ancient language must have been the first language and maybe even formed less as a way to communicate and more for the sake of magic itself. Like, because if that was the case, if creatures already, if people already had magic back then before they had words, that would mean it was a similar type of magic to how dragons used it. Except I bet you early people didn't have nearly as much instinct going for them to shape and control that magic when it actually happened. And a language
It
like the ancient language
gave
could have
them a
naturally
tool to guide
formed
that, yeah.
as a way to guide and shape their intentions, because back then intention probably was an expression of power, and that was something that needed to be controlled and shaped as they developed
Yeah.
more as
I
people.
don't think that is ever stated or even really implied anywhere in the story, but I don't think he ever really goes into the history of the language or where its power and anything comes from. I think it's
He
that's a
doesn't.
really
No Lord of the
interesting
Rings
theory.
appendix is here.
That's a really interesting theory, I think. It does make a lot of sense. I mean, because one of the things about the ancient language is that it's effectively composed of the like true names of things, right? Uh,
The words that like on which which yeah, is part of why it gives me that primal feeling, which I guess fits with it being called the ancient language, is like it's when you call something by its name in the ancient language, you are as perfectly as words can calling it not what you see it as, but exactly what it is.
exactly. I mean, that runs so deep in the language that you can't lie when you're speaking the language.
Yeah, which I love because not only does that fit well with what elves are, it in its own way becomes a explanation for something that elves are very well known for in like all stories they're in, and that's things like no, elves don't lie. They just say a lot of half truths.
Exactly. Which is something
And in
that
this
it's
case, it's
something
like,
our
cause like,
protagonist is
yeah,
warned about often by the dwarves he encounters.
yeah, exactly. Like, hey, just cause they're not strictly lying doesn't mean you can trust everything they say.
Yeah, because I mean, because interpretation becomes extremely important. Then you cannot outright lie in the ancient language, but you can still obfuscate the truth by speaking from ha 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 a certain point of view. Uh, and that shows in how spells are constructed too, because the way you interpret a word can alter the effects you can produce with a spell. There's even a reference to at some point someone in the story uses the word heal to kill someone.
Yep. It's another way that it's another way that you also get an advantage by knowing your opponent in a magic
Exactly.
battle because
Because you
someone casts a spell on you, if you could hear the words, but it's not your interpretation of those words that matters to how the spell works. It's theirs.
exactly, and it links again back to the psychic element because if someone knows their true name, their true self, and you break their mind and you
And
learn
you
their
know it.
true name, you own them.
Yep. Because guess what? That thing we talked about earlier, rule of how the ancient language works, the word is power, the word is the thing, that applies to people. If somebody knows your true name in the ancient language, them saying that gives them power over you the same way it would give them power over a rock.
And that is why our good friend Galbatorix is absolutely fucking terrifying in universe.
Because he's
Because,
he's not just good at breaking people. Like you mentioned that if you break somebody who knows their true name, you get it. Yeah, yeah. He goes a step beyond that. He's way better than most people who have ever lived, even in ancient times, at figuring out true names.
he used
So through probing somebody's mind and spending time with them, making them talk to him, he can figure out what their true name is, even if they didn't know it before, or get them to help them to figure it out while he has access to their mind, and then that's it. They belong to him.
yeah, it's he's a really interesting case as like the ultimate villain of a story because that's where his talent lies. It's in breaking minds and then using that information he gets from that process to find someone's true name and then gain just absolute control over them. Because without the aid of all those maddened Eldenari, and that's how he made them mad,
Yeah, he
he
otherwise
wasn't.
he wouldn't be an especially skilled mage or like powerful
Yeah,
warrior, at
he
least
has a
by
lot
the
of
standards of Dragon
experience
Rider.
by the time the story kicks off to going for him as well. But by like Dragon Rider terms, he's not that powerful on his own as a spellcaster.
Nope.
His immense power comes from the captive Eldenari, the like little rocks with dragon souls in them. He wasn't like his first dragon died. He couldn't.
Yeah,
Uh, he
which
wasn't
is
even.
not often the way it goes. It's a funny thing they show too is that we mentioned the soul split type thing when one dies and the other doesn't earlier.
Oh yeah, still applies to people. That's why he's evil now.
Dragons dragons tend to handle that side of things better than the human riders because they at least have more time and that primal deepness going to them. Humans are so much more ephemeral and mortal that that loss of life hits us doubly hard, and our what do you call it, our conception of it, at least is like at best like half as strong as a
Yeah,
dragon's. So that's like four times as much impact to like, oh God, the other half of my soul, and also like the thing that made me special, my timeless, ageless partner that I was going to spend eternity with is gone.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing that breaks him, and makes him go crazy, and then when he goes crazy, he leverages that ability he has to break minds to get himself a second dragon.
which awful, terrible thing, especially because that's, and I think that's probably another reason that that kind of thing hits humans harder than it was dragons. Like, well, no, I would say that's something that evens it out. Actually, dragons, a dragon cannot bond with another rider
No,
after theirs dies. That's
they
over.
don't
And
have
even
a
if they
true
could,
connection.
and even if they could, they wouldn't want to.
No.
Um, but like a human, a human who's either twisted enough or desperate enough or both could be like, "Oh God, give me another dragon. I need another dragon. I can't just like live my life as a person anymore." And Galbatorix kind of did that because he was alive when the Dragon Rider Order was actually still a thing, and so he kind of freaked out and was like, "Give me another dragon. You have to give me another dragon." And they were like, "Bro, you okay? You're sweating a little bit. Are you having withdrawals? Have you been taking your meds?" He's like, "I don't need my new meds. I just need a dragon right
No!
now." And so they say no. And then he snaps harder and takes one.
And just shatters its mind to make it his, not that it could ever fill the void, but, at that point he was so broken that it was good enough for him. And
Yep.
then he killed
Break
everybody.
breaks its mind while it's still essentially a baby, mind you, and then uses both magic and the shattering of its mind to also force it to grow up physically faster than it should.
Yeah.
Which just breaks its mind even further because then it's a sad, tortured child's mind in the twisted, gnarled, grotesque body of an oversized adult.
Yeah. Shuriken's
Shuriken is a
death
very
was a
sad
blessing.
creature. Shit, yeah, Shuriken's death was a absolute mercy. That poor creature never got to live any sort of life.
Yeah, that's why this all these layers are why the magic system is kind of one of the first things I point to when people criticize the originality of the inheritance cycle, because yes, all of these things are effectively heavily derived from sort of a predecessor writer, but he takes all these elements and meshes them all together into this wonderfully complex layered magic system
Yeah,
where
yeah,
everything relates
absolutely.
to
One that like
something else,
stands
where it
on its
has these
own.
defined rules. Exactly, it stands on its own and it needs more respect.
Yeah, and part of what's impressive is like he did it in a way that he didn't actually have to construct an entire language because like don't misunderstand us. Unlike if Tolkien had did this, the ancient language isn't complete, at least as far as we know. For all we know, he could have it in a journal or a diary
Yeah,
somewhere.
it's
But at
it's
least as far as the content of the books goes, even at the end, where he gives us explanations and definitions of every single word of the ancient language and almost every sentence and phrase in the ancient language that is used throughout all four books. He has an appendix just for that. He does not write out an entire alphabet or an entire dictionary of the ancient language. And
I don't even think we get an explanation of how the grammar works.
the thing is he does such a good job setting up the framework for what it is and why it works that he doesn't have to do that to make it believable. That territory is for the crazy people like Tolkien, God rest his soul.
Yeah, I mean, Tolkien was insane.
Yeah, no,
And
love that man. He is kind of crazy, in a good
And
way.
here's a good way to get all of my contemporaries to want me dead. Uh, Much better world builder than he was writer.
I think that's fair.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I was gonna say it. Tolkien's books, they read like encyclopedias, so I actually prefer the way Paolini did it, where it just felt integrated into the world as opposed to everything being explained to us in detail. I'm glad that he
Yeah,
explained
Tolkien.
them. Conversely, though, I'm glad he explained how magic works, because that aids the story more than it hurts it.
Kind of funny. Tolkien actually wrote kind of similarly to C.S. Lewis, except almost like it's almost like a robotic version of how C.S. Lewis writes the Chronicles of Narnia, because it's fitting you said it reads like an encyclopedia, because I would say it doesn't just read like an encyclopedia. It reads like someone reading an encyclopedia to you. The same way that the Chronicles of Narnia reads as if someone was reading you a bedtime story.
Oh,
Except,
I,
somebody reading you a bedtime story is personal and warm and friendly and helps you get invested in the story. Someone reading an encyclopedia to you is you having facts talked at you.
yeah, I mean, it's funny you say it's like it's written like someone reading you an encyclopedia because I think explicitly in universe that is actually what is happening.
Well, I mean, reading Lord of the Rings is supposed to be reading the Red Book of the West Marches,
Yeah.
written by Bilbo and Frodo.
So it does like there is a good explanation for why it reads the way it does.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's literally like it's to a point the perspective of two people with a bunch of addendums and fact checking, and is I mean like it's essentially framed as if um Frodo used all the other members of the Fellowship and like everybody else he could get a hold of after the story as editors for the book,
you
which
should
is
have
why
them
it has
listed
so
as
many.
references at the end.
Yeah, because like that's why it has so many addendums and everything, is he's having like everybody who was there for anything he wasn't or saw stuff from different angles from him fact check his shit as he writes it, which is really funny and also kind of like super meta, actually.
Yeah, it's either a genius method of covering for a lack of finesse as a writer, or a really fun coincidence.
I think it might be a little bit of both.
And it might be a little bit of both because, whilst I am definitely far more willing than most to shit on Tolkien as a writer, I will not question his genius.
No, absolutely not.
He is one of the founders of modern fantasy for a reason.
Yeah. Well, especially because, like, even if he wasn't an especially great, like, linear story writer, part of the reason the books do so well is if most of his skill is in world building, he has so much skill in world building that the world building almost stands on its own as enough to get people to read.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell how masterfully crafted his one world really is, because we're sitting here discussing a series of books that was heavily inspired by it decades later,
Yeah.
and that those refer and like that inspiration is still clear. It's
Hard
kind
to
of
make
cool.
something in modern fantasy in modern high fantasy that's not at least partially inspired by Lord of the Rings. Like it's a foundational series at this point.
It's why everyone's got grouchy dwarves and prissy elves and
And it's
humans just
where
try to get
orcs come
by.
from.
Hobbits too, I think.
Yeah, no,
Um,
but see, here's the difference. Hobbits are in some things. Orcs are in a lot of things.
you see,
Orcs are in so
that's
much
because
things you could
Hobbits got trademarked.
fair. But I mean, it's, like you could look at like the other fantasy races and be like, "Oh yeah, they're inspired here and here, but they're older than that. They're from this and this and this and this." Not orcs.
Nope.
Orcs are in all those things, and they're just from Lord of the Rings, a story that is like what 50 years old at this
It's
point, only
more,
like
maybe. I'm not
50,
sure when it was.
somewhere between 50 or 60. I want to say the book's released in the 70s,
Uh,
or I want to say when was Fellowship
no,
of
I
the
think it was. Was it that recent? I feel like it should have been later than that. I mean,
let me
earlier. You know, the one that goes the other direction.
check.
Um,
I swear to God, Google, if you try to show me the fucking movie when I type in The Hobbit, you go fuck yourself. How dare you? How fucking dare you? Anyways. Okay, yeah, no, so The Hobbit was published in 1937.
yeah,
I'm remembering wrong.
that's definitely
I'm
sounds
remembering
more
way
right.
wrong. That must be because the books I was reading when I was younger were republished and refurbished after his death.
Yeah, I mean, he started having the ideas, I think, for The Hobbit and for the world larger whilst he was in the middle of World War One, maybe a little bit before.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite like meta references to an author ever is Frodo losing a finger. Because for a lot of people who don't know, Tolkien lost one of his fingers fighting in World War One, and writes about. And one of the things he mentions at the end when he has his little personal notes is what a pain in the ass it was, because his main it was his dominant hand he was missing a finger from. So he wrote all those books, which, obviously back then he wasn't typing on a computer. He wrote it all by hand with a missing finger.
Let it not be said. Rather, I'm going to try that again. It should not be left unsaid that Tolkien was in fact a badass.
Yeah, no, and but yeah, that's why I love that. Like, not only did he do all that with nine fingers, but that's why it might not be the reason Frodo gets his finger bitten off, but it's the reason he gives a little extra attention of it, because he mentions later on
Because
that
he
like
knows how much it sucks.
he mentions later on after that Frodo starts being called Frodo of the Nine Fingers. He gets a fucking nickname for his missing finger, and I feel like that was him having a little fun at himself.
Uh, but yeah, something I uh going back from Tolkien to Paolini that I like, right, is that a lot of people, when they are inspired by Tolkien, which is basically every fantasy writer ever, they kind of end up reusing all of his races, but end up with this heavily distilled versions of them.
Yeah.
Uh, like caricatures of the base ideas and stereotypes of of those races within Tolkien's world.
Yeah, which I think, to be fair, is I think he was probably the first writer to turn those races into people, because elves, for instance, before that, they weren't people, they were fairies.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand the origins and all that, but later writers should have probably known better. But
Yeah,
Paolini kind of he does that a little bit with the elves, if we're gonna be honest. His elves are pretty standard Tolkien elves, but
at the
his
baseline.
his other fantasy races are really well developed. The dwarves in particular have a really well thought out, super intricate political system and religious structure, and
Yeah,
their how they
whereas
interact with the other races is really well thought out. In the second and is it the second or is it the no? It's the third book more. Uh, Aragorn has to spend a lot of time alone without Saphira, just with a bunch of dwarves,
yeah.
basically.
Also,
Uh,
from the second book on, dwarves major aspect, because like literally start the beginning of the second book living in the capital of like what's
Yeah,
left of the
and
dwarven
ends
lands.
the first book as well. There, that's where the final conflict of the last book takes part.
Which is where we
The
get
first book
the
rather
the,
takes
the
place.
beautiful the beautiful star sapphire, which I never fail to think of whenever our friend Safi is relevant.
That is,
Because pink sapphire,
yeah. I'm now never going to be able to unsee that. Thanks. But yeah,
ah, Isidar Mithrim.
he spends a lot of time with the dwarves for a while because there's some political shenanigans that needs to happen to get them back on side, and it's a really deep dive into their society that's really interesting. Um, and I think he also does a really good job, interestingly enough, with his world's equivalent of orcs, who
Yes.
who are
And man, do I love that he actually made his own thing that's just vaguely reminiscent of orcs
yeah,
instead of orcs.
they're that world's rough equivalent. They're the big stereotyped as dumb, violent guys,
Yeah. But
called
you could say there's
Urgles.
he and it's so funny too, because he goes out of his way to kind of like dupe the audience with them at first, because Urgles start out for all intents and purposes just being orcs with a little bit of goat thrown in there.
Yeah,
But you find out later that there's way more to them. And of course you didn't get to see all that there really was to them at first because they were just an antagonistic force. How were we as the audience with Aragon as our POV character going to learn about them when the only interactions they were having at first was trying to kill him because they were already enslaved by a big bad main villain man.
Yeah, not to mention that even when they're not enslaved, they have a very problematic, very conflict-based culture that because like there was always even before they were enslaved, there was historical conflict between people, elves, dwarves, and Urgles, whatever. Because
Oh yeah, I mean
their
especially
entire
since
social
Urgles are
status
angry road
like
people.
the entire structure of their social status in their society is based on battles won.
Yeah,
That's just how their culture is built, but it's a fairly deep culture beyond that. Like they have their tapestry things that show their histories and all that. They have their different roles in their tribes and stuff like that. Uh,
their shamanistic take on both magic and faith.
yeah, exactly. Which is also really quite cool. And they find a so there is all this culture behind it, and they find a solution to that culture in the end.
Yeah.
Uh,
Also, I
oh
mean like their twist which is one way in which they must have been at least I want to say partially inspired by orcs. There's for orcs we have uruks and urukai, which are a bigger, smarter, stronger form of orcs.
yeah,
Um,
they're like what
Urgles kind of have that too. I can't remember the word for it,
it
but
starts with a K. Is it? It's like Carl or Krull or something like that. I think.
yeah, but the Urgle equivalent to Urukai, uh, way scarier, way more significant differences than Urukai. Unlike with Urukai, they are not, for one thing, always smarter. But as far as the physical aspect goes of it, um, yeah, they're like 8.5 feet tall, strong enough to like fucking throw a horse and have enough stamina and endurance. Basically, they have the stamina, endurance, and strength of hippos, but in a person-shaped package.
With a
They
pair of
run,
enormous fuck off horns.
yeah, they run at what sounds like 30 miles an hour and can run for such long periods of time that, like, unironically, there's a point in the story where they're traveling alongside people with horses and they just keep up on foot.
Yeah, they are definitely not people you want as enemies, which is part of why it's really cool when they actually start working on the same side.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. And
rough
part of why
because
that's
there's a
so
lot of
interesting
culture
too is
clash.
you find out that it's a funny coincidence that Aragon almost never fights any of that type of Urgle, and part of that is because they do tend to be more dominant within Urgle society than the others. They're not as easily manipulated and cowed even by somebody like like Galbatorix. He didn't those guys weren't enslaved. They did serve him for a while, but that was kind of like all of Urgle culture served Galbatorix for a while because he essentially pulled a Mass Effect and kind of like uplifted them to a point as a species. He came in for a while, was big, super strong magic man, and took advantage of that to come to this society that respects strength and battles one above all else, and essentially used that to be like, "Hi, I'm your father now." Which, if you think that sounds like I'm trying to make a daddy joke, the Urgles name him father in their language, so
Oh god, they do, don't they?
not an
Um,
exaggeration.
but yeah, one of the things I really like about them is that we learn more about their culture and stuff because when they do decide to start working with the other sort of races against Galbatorix and they start trying to find some peace and middle ground, we actually start getting to see Urgle characters as people, not as
Yeah,
fodder or as a threat chasing people down.
yeah, they start getting to interact with main characters more directly and deeply, especially Naswada, when we're getting our
Roran
POV
a lot
moment
too.
with her. And then when we get our really good moment later where Aragon just runs off for a while and hangs out with the broest of the Urgles,
That's
my
where
man. And they just hang out for an extended period
They
of
have a
time.
conversation about how Urgles and dwarves, for some reason, both have 7 toes on each foot, whilst elves and humans both have 5 toes on each foot.
That's true. I love that, and I love that so much because that could be so much just you could easily, if you wanted to, look at that as telling the audience some interesting side facts about them. But it's a very genuine thing because they're a culture that every other culture essentially is very ignorant of. And so it's an interesting bit of trivia for us, but also for Aragon because it's these two people who normally would never get to sit down and talk, just talking about things, just shooting the shit, and things are coming up, and it's just this moment of like, yeah, like how how come you guys got more toes than us? Does the dwarves got that too? What's
That's
up with that? And him just being like, you know,
yeah, the
it's
subtle implication that they evolved from the same ancestor at the same time as, or it could just be a
or
weird
that they
coincidence.
or also that they could have been created potentially by the same gods.
Yes, I mean because the status of gods in this world is very vague.
It's very vague. I do
The
like
the
though
elves
we
outright don't believe in them. The dragons are like, yeah, we're gods. And then the
and
humans
I
and
love that
dwarves.
we get a small implication that there that there might not necessarily be anybody in out of all those groups who's wrong. Like the elves could be right in that in a way, even if all those beings do exist, they might not really be gods, not omniscient, not omnipotent, and definitely not wholly either positive or malignant. But but at the same time, the dragons seeing themselves as the closest thing to gods makes sense because unlike the other interpretations of gods, dragons are physically there as a part of the earth that we
And
can
ludicrously
see
powerful. So
and touch and impact things and are incredibly powerful, ancient, and in tune with nature, which are all godly things. And despite the fact that the dwarves have a much more typical idea of faith and everything, we get some small hints here and there that their gods might be real too.
yeah,
Like,
like the coronation with that weird avatar thing that doesn't get any explanation
nope.
other than the elves just write it off and go, yeah.
Hey, it could be some bit of ancient magic tied to the collective
I
faith
mean,
of the
that's
dwarven
it very
people
well
and all.
could be. I mean, that's one of the very cool things about the world building in general for the inheritance cycle is that the world is implied to be much older and bigger than the snippet we see.
Kind of like Middle Earth.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's where some of
Except
that Tolkien comes in.
except Middle Earth is also weird because it's also kind of like the middle of the earth. Name's a little more literal than you would expect. But I can't remember Allegasia. That's right,
Yes,
Allegasia.
Allegatia. I mean, the story ends with Aragorn like getting on a boat and like going off to look for new lands.
The story ends with Aragon doing a elf. Oh wait, no, hold on. I didn't wait. No, I mean he literally also probably does that, but that's not what I meant. I meant
I don't
because
think he
he
gets the
does what the
opportunity
elves
actually.
he does what the elves do in Lord of the Rings, almost verbatim. Except, well, to be fair, no, he's going off in more of a pioneering thing. He's like, there's probably a lot more to the world
I mean, they're
out
explicit.
there.
Here's a terrifying thought for that world as far as that world goes. There explicitly is other lands beyond Allegatia. We know that because the Razak come from one.
Yeah, Allegasia just has so much of its own shit going on, and also exploring the ocean beyond the lands
I mean,
around
technically, I don't.
Allegasia
I
and
would
the
say I
island
think
is hard.
technically Surtur is not part of Allegatia. I think. I mean, it's on like the same landmass, but I suppose so. It doesn't really
Me,
count,
I
but
thought Allegasia was the name of the continent, not just the boundary.
it might be both. I'm not sure. But yeah, Surtur's part of the same landmass, so it doesn't really count. But it is like an outside kingdom in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. But
As to be more specific, this continent has so much of its own shit going on, and the oceans beyond a certain range of it can be so hard to manage that, like, they don't. Why would anybody there worry about what's outside? They can't even go there.
Yeah, I mean, those oceans are vast and unknown and terrifying, and all anyone
Yep,
knows
we
about
get it.
them is that at
We
some
get a
point,
small we get a small hint of how terrifying the oceans can be in a bit when Roran has to cross the sea a little bit.
that huge fucking whirlpool he's got to cross, and I think there's a gigantic sea serpent in the story at
There
some
is,
point,
and
and that
that's
thing's big
without
enough.
even
That thing's big enough and scary enough to threaten dragons Saphira's size.
and that's without even fully leaving the boundaries of Allegasia.
Yeah.
That's just that's homegrown water. That's not even the bigger, wider Eldritch Horror Ocean yet.
Yes. And again, it can't be stressed enough. The only thing that these people really know about because none of them have been to these other lands. The only thing they know about the other lands really is that
The Razak.
at some point humans came from overseas, I think, originally.
Yeah, humans as far as we know are like outside,
Yeah.
not necessarily colonizers. It sounds a little bit more like a what you call it, not an escape, an exodus sort of thing.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they were
Yeah.
compelled
At
to
some
leave
point
wherever they were.
humans came there and fucked everything up.
What?
uh
When have we ever done that?
And at some point, I think after that, the Razak showed up the fucking bird, bug, nightmare fuel hunter things, potentially in
Horrible,
pursuit of people.
the horrible, awful Beetleborg, Beetlebird creatures
Yeah,
that exist purely
to
to be
feast
the
on other
literal
sentient things.
stuff of our nightmares and feast upon us.
Yeah, so there's a world out there where there's just a continent with more of those. Because it can't be stressed, there was two, technically four, because their mounts are actually their parents. There was that many, plus some eggs, uh, in the entirety of Allegatia, and that was a problem. Somewhere out this world, there's a continent with more of those. There's always, and this to this
And
day, there's this voice in
and
the back of my head going, "What
as
if
a
the
result of
continent
having
Aragon
them,
lands on is that one?"
and not only that, must by virtue of evolution and all that, probably also creatures that are capable of predating
On
on the
them,
Razak,
yeah.
which is oof, don't like that.
Can't wait for the next book set in that world to be a horror story.
That'd be a really interesting one. And of course, we may never see that stuff, but that's fine because
I think he does
in
have
him
plans to return to that world. I think
he
he
does.
was doing
But
some short
part of what I
stories or
think
something.
is interesting that is in a big important part of world building is actually vagary. You have to it, part of good world building is you have to be vague about some things in your world building. You can't explain every mystery because there are always some mysteries that have more value in being mysterious and being objects of curiosity than than the actual information could itself be.
Absolutely. Yeah. On that
Which
note,
is part
though,
of why that thing is interesting enough that we just talked about it for 10 minutes.
yeah, we've been going for nearly 20 minutes longer than usual, so I think that we should wrap things up there. So I think I'll end this with the thought that Roran 1v1'd an Urgle with his bare hands and won.
Hell yeah, he did.
So we'll end
He
we'll end
even
this
wrestled
one.
that guy with his hands. It's like an angry goatmeister.
We'll end this one like we began, with the reminder that Roran is a badass.
Roran is a badass, and I named a character I wrote after him, and then vaguely named another character after that one, and that's why we have Rowan instead of Roran.
Uh, yeah, so you guys can find me at Daniel Wright 7 on Twitter, where I occasionally tweet things about what I'm doing or share generic memes. And you will see more of our friend John's work soon because he's been doing some stuff for me.
Yes, and to those of you who've heard all this, and I promise you, despite the fact that we've explained some things, if you've never read the Inheritance series, there's still so much more than we could say, and a lot you would enjoy, even with foreknowledge. We can attest as people who've reread it. And like is if you haven't read those books yet and you like reading books, especially if you like dragons, read those books. Was one of the best series to directly involve dragons, and they're they have value not only as good books, but as good books written by a young author. It's a very good thing for any aspiring young authors themselves to experience, I think.
Damn straight. Go forth and consume our childhoods, and then also all of the things that influenced those books. We'll be
But please
seeing
don't
you guys
literally consume our childhoods. We liked existing.
more or less.